Yes, would you like to ask Mr. Sounes to come back, please? Right, Mr. Sounes, I'm sorry that the break was rather longer than we'd intended. There were some practical problems with the technical equipment. I hope someone told you what was going on.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Anyway, you ready to carry on now?
I am.
Yes. Yes, Ms.
Thank
Green.
you. Yes. Yes. So, Mr. Sounes, I just want to take you to another. We've looked up the picture you gave us, and we've found another one in the series, I think, that you referred to, that you were shown at the Hayes Galleria meeting. Can we go to SEA 403516? There we go. And that's more of a close-up of the Ferrier Point project. So is that the kind of photo you think you were shown at that meeting?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the mineral wool is the pale yellow substance that's behind the cladding, and you know instantly it's not a PIR or other phenolic product because it doesn't have the foil facer with the insulation name on it.
You can see that
right?
it's the mineral wool.
You can see it's mineral wool, you're saying? Yeah. Great. Thank you. And then just another question picking up on my last theme. Did Mr. Crawford ever say to you that he had got an assurance from Exova that the RS 5000 product was safe from a fire point of view? So we know RS 5000 is the same as FR 5000, it was just marketed differently. Did Mr. Crawford ever say that he'd had that assurance from Exova?
I obviously watched Neil's testimony, and I was copied into those emails September 14 and March 15. I think you're asking me to summarise all of that.
No, I'm not. I'm asking you, at the time of the Grenfell project, thinking back at the time, try and forget the evidence that you heard in the inquiry. Do you remember Mr. Crawford ever saying to you that he'd got an assurance from Exova that the RS 5000 was safe from a fire point of view?
As I say, I thought that was covered in those emails much later.
I see. So you didn't know any more than was in those email chains that was being disclosed at the time? Yeah.
Range, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask you, is your transcript functioning properly?
No, actually it's gone back up to the top again.
Well, mine keeps resetting itself every few seconds, as far as I can see.
I think that was part of the problem this morning.
I think it was. I interrupt you only in case you, or those behind you, need to have it working. I mean, I can manage without it.
Mine's fine.
Yours working all right? There's just two answers working all right, so we don't need to stop. I can't really... It looked to me as though the feed onto the large screens is running pretty normally. Is that right? Yeah. All right. Well, then I can manage without it.
Let's carry on. Ideally, I would have it because it is helpful for me to have it, but let's carry on for the moment.
Yours is not functioning either?
Not right now.
Right. Well, will you let me know if it's a problem?
Yeah, I will.
And then we'll see what can be done. Thank you.
So now I want to look at an email from September 2013. This is SEA 408790. So if we can just blow up the top half of that for now. This is an email from you on the 27th of September 13 to various people on the project, including some TMO personnel, Matt Smith of Max Fordham as well, and some Artelia people are there, Chuichin Lim, we see. And you say this in the first paragraph: Dear all, we met with Harley Curtin Wall this morning to discuss the project. They are very keen and have been tracking the project for some time. They are specialists in this type of project, and then you've given a link to their webpage. They pointed to Ferrier Point as being very similar to Grenfell, although it is triple glazed and super insulated. We had forwarded them sample details and the elevation measure beforehand. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So you're referring there to the Ferrier Point project as being very similar, and it's the Ferrier Point project photos you think you were shown in that meeting.
Yes.
That's correct. Did you say there the Ferrier Point, they pointed to Ferrier Point as being very similar to Grenfell. Did you interrogate whether the similarity related to the insulation type or solely to the use of ACM?
Neither, actually. I think it was a tall council block which had been overclad and the windows replaced.
I see.
That's the biggest
Yeah.
obvious problem.
So that's what made it similar in terms of a project.
Yeah.
I understand. Now, there's no reference here to any specific discussion about the insulation. We may come back to some of this in terms of the ACM, but we can't see anything specifically said about the insulation in this email, is there? No. Now, I now want to look at what the Nbs specification said about the insulation. This was part of the employer's requirements. And just for the record, you begin to address this at paragraph 286 and following of your witness statement. When you drafted the insulation section of the Nbs specification, did you ever send that to Exova or Max Fordham so they could comment on that aspect of the specification?
Well, I didn't prepare the specifications. You would normally consult with a relevant person while preparing them. You wouldn't necessarily use them as a checker. But I don't recall, obviously, sending it.
And when you say I didn't prepare the specification, is that because you're saying it was other more junior representatives of Studio E that were doing the specification work?
I think we discussed this previously. I think it was shared somewhere between Thomas Reck and Adrian Dress, and I might have done some of it. I know I did the last bit, which was a section on a revision to the doors.
Right, yeah.
I don't recall doing anything else.
Yeah. Can we just look at the NBS specification? This is a SEA 50169. It's dated the 30th of January 2014. You see that in the little revisions box, the tiny text there. 30th of January, L1 doors revised. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So this seems to have been a revised version that was issued because there'd been a change to the L20 doors package. And then within that, can we go to page 63? And this is the start of the 892 rain screen cladding section. And then if we go on within that to page 73, and we look at the top of that page, we blow that up, 776 thermal insulation. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And we can see it says manufacturer Celotex, 2 lines down. And then there's actually the product given a bit further down, product reference FR5000, aluminium foil face both sides. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you know who put together this part of the NBS specification within Studio E?
I can't, I mean, I can only guess, but I think it's a bit unfair. No,
Was it you that put together this section? Are you clear that you did do it or didn't
I'm
get involved
reasonably
in
confident that it wasn't me.
It wasn't you.
No.
In which case, I'm not going to ask you some of the detailed questions we put to Mr. Reck on this. Can we just look back at your witness statement? This is SEA 30144273 at page 118. And I want to look at what you say at paragraph 287 in the first sentence. You say, with regard to the insulation, I refer you back to paragraphs 43.9 and 116.2, where I discuss how the insulation was selected by Max Fordham, and then you give the specification for the insulation in the NBS, which we've just looked at. And I just want to focus on the use of your word selected. Does it remain your evidence that the insulation was selected by Max Fordham?
They put it forward in the first instance.
Would you agree with me, therefore, that a more accurate description of what happened is that Max Fordham suggested the use of a particular insulation product, but it was Studio E as architect who then specified it in the employer's requirements?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Now, looking down just a little bit further on in your witness statement at this point, at paragraph 292 on page 121, you say in third line down on 121, you say, at this stage, we would not go beyond addressing the issues raised by building control in the early meetings, specifically on the 6th of November 2012, which Adrian Jess attended, and 17th September 2013, Paul Hanson's building control comments received 31st December 2013, and the input from Exova regarding fire strategy. We would not usually seek to verify compliance of all materials and products prior to submitting a building control full plans application. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, we know that, and we'll come to this later when I ask you some questions about building control, that you didn't actually submit the building control full plans application until August 2014. And I want to ask you about that last sentence. Can you explain why it was Studio E's practice not to verify the compliance of materials and products prior to submitting a building controls full plans application?
Well, full compliance is only possible through an application, as I understand it. You don't know until you've had the submission verified and agreed with building control, so your compliance is subject to receiving that certificate. It all depends on that process. I think your more general question is, would we seek to satisfy ourselves that it would comply?
Yes.
Yes.
That's my general
Yes.
question. Wouldn't you
No.
seek to satisfy yourselves about compliance of the materials and products prior to submitting a building control full plans application?
Invariably, it's not something you doubt. If you've specified something you think is suitable, or you have been recommended as suitable, you do not expect to be told once you've submitted with it.
But do you agree, if you don't do an internal check that the materials are compliant prior to submitting the building control application, you're at risk of making a submission that might be non-compliant with the building regulations?
I think every application involves a process of agreeing materials with building control, and there is some risk attached to that in every project. On a design and build project, stage E in particular, I think it's not possible to confirm compliance. Well, not that it's not possible. Your efforts could come to nothing if the contractor makes a change. So you're unlikely to be sure that you have complied anyway. So I think it would be it was not common practice to do a full Part B compliance assessment at stage D or at stage E. That was not.
Yeah. And I think what you've just said is because otherwise you'd be concerned that there'd be a change and it would be wasted work. Is that what you're saying?
That'd be one reason, yes.
Any other particular reasons?
A building control might take a different view.
So is what you're saying that effectively what you're doing by putting a building control full plans application in it is opening up a dialogue with building control about the compliance of the materials? Is that what you're saying?
I think every project we seek to engage building control at the earliest opportunity to understand issues that need to be addressed. Yes, I think that's my experience. Going back as far as I can remember, we would seek to get building controls input on the salient issues.
So just to be clear, does it follow that there might be building control full plans applications you're submitting where you're not entirely sure that building control are going to agree that the materials are compliant, and you're anticipating they might come back at you and challenge that?
At stage E, I would expect them to be minor details.
I'm
rather
talking
than
about when the
fundamentals.
full plans application's gone in, Mr. Sounes. Are you sometimes putting in the full plans application? So that would be after stage E, yes?
Full plans is, in the first instance, is the general arrangements, and the details usually follow.
But when those details are submitted, are there times when you're putting those details in and they've got certain products in them and you're thinking to yourself, actually, some of those building control might challenge, might pick up on, and we might have to discuss that further with them? Is that part of the thought process?
Obviously, if there was any concern, we would raise it sooner. And
I
I think that is the root of your question: is why weren't we concerned?
Well,
we had no reason to be concerned.
Could you just help me a little further on this? Would you satisfy yourself that materials complied with the regulatory requirements before you put them up to building control?
Regulatory requirements and statutory standards.
Well, whatever.
These aren't the way people approach the approved document.
Let me explain. I'm a little surprised if you're saying that you would propose materials to building control without being reasonably confident in your own mind that they did comply with any necessary requirements.
We were reasonably confident that they complied.
So you would satisfy yourself, are you saying, before you put materials up for consideration by building control, that they did comply?
In our minds, we had no reason to be concerned.
Well, that may or may not be quite the same thing, but anyway, on you go, Ms. Green.
Well, the standards, as you've referred to them before, imply that it's a clear cut, whereas my experience is the satisfying the requirements of Part B is not so clear cut.
No, that I understand. I just wondered what was lurking in this sentence that you've been asked about, that you wouldn't seek to verify compliance before you submitted a full plans application. And I just wanted to understand whether you were saying that you would put up materials without being satisfied yourself of their compliance.
No, I think that's taking it a bit a very wide interpretation of that statement.
Well, that's why I'm giving you an opportunity to explain it.
Where products had been used before, in the same instance, in the same circumstances, whether it be by ourselves or where we were aware in this instance that they had been used elsewhere, we had a measure of confidence that the materials must comply. Is that,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, it's
All right. Yes, thank you. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Would you agree that if you don't take proactive steps to satisfy yourselves on each particular project that the materials are compliant, that there could be a significant impact on programme and cost if it suddenly turns out that there's a non-compliance in the application?
most definitely there's a risk of impact on programme and cost. And I think as a lead designer, you're thinking of that throughout.
I see.
In your design.
Okay. Is what you've described, so this process of saying, well, if it's been used in a similar type of project, we don't have to be, we don't have to be concerned about the compliance. Do you think that was common in the construction industry at the time? Was that an attitude you had to other projects within Studio E?
I think if I can take the example of the insulation.
Yeah.
There's an email from Ledbetter Bouygues that we received, I think it was in January 2013, from a Juan Medina. It doesn't appear in my statements, and I've no idea if it's being disclosed, but he's responding to Adrian about the insulation. He says, I think you may need to use phenolic because it's a high-rise. So if you're asking me, was it Studio E's policy? I think there is a common understanding of where issues are and what is acceptable. And I think at that point, in 2013, people understood it was acceptable.
Yeah, I understand.
So if there had been any alarm raised from any quarter, I think it would have come through quickly.
Now, if you, Studio E, didn't take proactive steps yourselves to verify compliance before the building control full plans application, when in the process would you expect compliance of the materials to be addressed, either by you or someone else? So you haven't taken those proactive steps prior to the building control full plans going in. Is it a question of just waiting for building control to come back to you? Or would you conduct a compliance assessment yourselves, a positive one, at some point?
I think you've asked me this before, and that is a duty which goes, I would argue, goes far beyond our role at any point. What I think, for instance, the smoke ventilator subcontractor did is he engaged in a dialogue from an early point with building control to reach an agreement. And that was a particularly difficult item. Usually in preparing your designs, it's when you get to the final detail design that you would, to avoid abortive work, never mind any impact on the project, you would try and understand for yourself that it complied.
Let's take your example, the insulation, which is what we've been discussing as an example. So you yourselves haven't positively sought to go out and confirm that it does in fact comply. You've assumed that from basically the fact it's been used on other projects. What is the position after the full plans application goes in? If building control don't come back to you and query the insulation, does there come another point in the process where you, Studio E, would have checked for compliance with the building regulations?
Not on this project. I don't think we would. It's a design and build. I'm not sure that the full effect of design and build is understood by the inquiry. It does sideline the original architect's role from what it was pre-innovation. We're no longer, in any sense, policing what other people are doing.
Okay. Now, before we leave the topic of insulation, I've just got a few questions about the selection of the insulation after the employer's requirements were prepared. Did you ever review, as far as you were aware, or did Studio E review the specification of Celotex FR5000 once the design was changed to the Rainabon ACM panels in order to check whether the products were suitable in this different application?
No.
Did you ever ask Harley, Exova or Ryden whether the change of cladding arrangement had any implications on the type of insulation to be used?
No.
Now, in fact, we know that it was Celotex RS 5000, which was finally chosen for use on the project, and not the FR 5000 product. Do you know when that substitution took place?
I don't know.
No. Were you aware of that substitution at the time?
I might have been. I was copied in on the emails, so, but whether I was, I can't remember.
Do you know why this different Celotex product was selected?
I'm afraid too much time has passed.
I'm just seeking to understand how involved you were in that bit of the project, because I know by that point Mr. Crawford was more the day-to-day point of contact within Studio E.
I'm afraid I'm at risk of saying something that overlaps with something that he said, and I'm not sure.
Okay. I do want to ask you something about Mr. Crawford's evidence and what he said. He said, this is day 9, page 139, lines 18 to 20. He said that you were fairly adamant about the appropriateness of using FR 5000 on the project.
Me?
Yes, that you had been he said you were fairly adamant about using the FR 5000 with reference to what was in the Nbs specification. Did you make that clear to Mr. Crawford?
Sorry, what was the context?
Mr. Crawford said in his evidence that you were fairly adamant about the appropriateness of using the FR 5000 on the project. That's what he said. And I just wanted to ask whether you recall having conversations with Mr. Crawford in which you were expressing a confidence or being adamant with him that FR 5000 was appropriate.
I can't remember, I'm afraid, any conversation that was that definitive.
Okay. So I just want to ask you just a few questions about the Calc project, the Kensington Academy Leisure Centre project, and then we're going to come on to look at the big topic for today, which will be the ACM panels. So you told us back in March, on day 7 of your evidence, that you were involved in Calc, but primarily in the bid process. Is that right?
Yes.
And you also said that you were aware of the specifications for the Calc project, such as the external wall build-up, but that came later. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you recall when you came to know about the details of the external wall build-up on the Calc project, specifically for the school? Can you recall approximately when you might have known about that?
I'm sure what you're going to ask me about the Calc facade, because I'm not that familiar with it.
Okay. Well, let me ask my questions, and if you're not familiar with it, then please say. Can we just go to SEA 406047? And I want to look at the third email down on that page, at the very bottom of the page. This is from Mr. Cushel to Mr. Lloyd Jones, copying you and others in within Studio E. And you say, David, let's stick with Wednesday for a design review. And then you say this: the technical audit for Calc would best be carried out by Bruce or Mark or both. And then you talk about availability. Were you ultimately asked to do the technical audit for the Calc project?
I can't remember.
You can't remember?
No.
So you can't remember whether you did it on the Calc?
I can't remember, sorry. No. I might have done. I think Neil would have formalised it. In other words, the record would have been, I think, prepared by him. So I might have done, but because I didn't prepare anything, I don't recall.
I see. So you're saying because Mr. Crawford might have prepared the documents for it?
Yeah, more clear to me and to you that
Yeah.
he was involved, but I don't recall being involved.
Okay.
It's possible, though.
Okay.
Just don't-
Perhaps I can ask then, were you aware that on the academy, that the school project, a non-combustible mineral insulation had been used in the cladding system? Was that something you had an awareness of at the time?
No.
And there's a document which shows that the build-up was an ACM panel with combustible styrofoam insulation backed with a non-combustible mineral insulation. Now remember, the academy was a low-rise building, so I'm not suggesting that was non-compliant. I'm just asking you whether you knew about that wall build-up and the use of the non-combustible mineral insulation as part of it.
No.
No. Okay, so let's move now to ask, I'm going to ask you some questions about the rain screen cladding itself, the ACM, and including the eventual decision to use the aluminium composite material panels. Can we start by looking at paragraph 71 of your statement? This is SEA 30/14273 at page 35. And you say this, you say, after some searching online, I approached CEP Architectural Facades Limited, CEP, a cladding product supplier, with a view to meeting to discuss the project. As I recall, CEP had experience in overcladding residential towers, particularly in the Midlands where they were based. And then you say, my recollection is that Jeff Blades of CEP may have met one of my colleagues, possibly Marcus Kiefer, on site in April. This is 2012, by the way, so this is early on. And I met him at our office a week or so later, perhaps on the 11th of April 2012. And then you say, Jeff emailed me detailed drawings for a project called Stretford House on the 5th of April 2012. They showed a multi-storey brick building with new windows, external insulation and ACM cladding. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, I just want to be completely clear about how CEP came to be involved. Is it right that you were not familiar with CEP before this project?
No.
And you found them, as you say there, by searching on the internet, is that correct?
Yes.
Was there anything particular that drew your attention towards them?
Overcladding of high-rise. In other
Yeah.
words, council blocks.
So you could see that on their profile, could you?
Yes.
Yeah. And they're a cladding product supplier, is that right?
That's in retrospect. At the time, I wasn't entirely clear what they did. I know they were involved, but I wasn't sure if they were a contractor or fabricator or supplier.
I see, yeah. Can we then go to CEP 3048112? And I want to look in the middle of that first page to the email, yes, of the 4th of April 2012 from Mr. Kiefer to Jeff Blades, copying you in. And he says, Dear Jeff, Bruce instructed me to issue you some information regarding the Grenfell Tower upgrade. Hence, find attached our drawing showing indicative existing floor plans and the south elevation as well as photos of the tower. Since we are further meeting with the client on the morning of the 9th of April 2012, we would appreciate your initial thoughts regarding the appropriate cladding systems and the rates associated with them. And then if you have any queries, please do not hesitate to contact Bruce or myself. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And then he says, note, this is one of 5 emails because of the size of the attached files. So you're asking CEP for their initial thoughts. And then if we can go to Mr. Blades' response, this is at SEA 403941. If we can blow that up. So this is his response. It's just to you on the 5th of April. He says, Bruce, please see the attached details which may be of benefit for your meeting on Tuesday. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And we can see from the attachments that what he's done is he's emailed you drawing details of a multi-storey brick building called Stretford House, which had new windows, external insulation and ACM cladding. Now, do you recall having any impressions of the details provided to you by CEP when you received them?
No. I may have opened one or two, but at the time, given that the project was just setting out, I don't believe I looked at them or scrutinised them in any detail.
Yeah. Did you notice that from this, the details that were sent, that the CEP system involved rock wool insulation?
No.
We can see that, just to make that good. Let's look at SEA 403943. This is one of the details that he sent you. We can see it's for the Stretford House project and the label on the bottom right-hand corner. And if you look on the left-hand side, the first written label, if we can zoom into that, yeah, it says rock wool duo slab insulation there. Do you see that?
Yeah.
But you didn't note that at the time. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Blades of CEP what insulation product to use at the on Grenfell?
No, this was before the U-value discussion started. I mean, this was within a week or two within a month of our first site visit.
Yeah. Did you notice at the time that some of these drawings refer to fire barriers within the cladding build-up?
I did not notice that at the time.
Yeah.
No.
Now, let's go on to SEA 403965. And I want to look at the second email down on the first page. This is an email from you to Mr. Blades of the 10th of April 2012. And it's clear from the email that you've arranged to meet at site the following day when this email's sent. And because you say in the beginning, we would like to meet at site tomorrow rather than our office. And you say the site address is a little complicated, you give the address. I might need to leave before you get there. And then in that last paragraph on that page, you say it's important to be discreet while we are there, as the political context for the development and the development of the adjoining site is very sensitive. I would refrain from discussing with residents or staff who you might meet or discussing drawings where anyone can see them. There is enough misinformation about on the estate and we don't want to add to it unwittingly. Now, I'm going to come back and ask you about this in the context of the whole question of resident engagement separately, but just it's part of the chronology here. Did you end up meeting Mr. Sounes on site?
Sorry,
I beg your pardon, you are Mr. Sounes. Mr. Blades on site the next day.
I don't think I can't remember meeting him. No.
Do you recall that? Have any recollection of meeting? You said I might need to leave before you get there, so it's possible it was Mr. Kiefer that he met.
Well, I'm pretty sure I didn't meet him on site. I think Marcus might have met him on site. That's the memory I'm trying to draw on.
You say in that email that the political context was sensitive. The political context for the development and the development of the adjoining site is very sensitive. Why did you say that? What was the reason for that?
Prior to this, I had received an email from Mark Anderson from the TMO warning me of speaking to someone in the TMO saying that Well, go back to the context. The context was the development of the Calc project. The development on the adjoining site is very sensitive, and there had been some objections raised to that development. The reason I think I might have warned him is to not discuss things openly was that email from Mark Anderson.
I see. Okay. Now, as you said just a moment ago, in your statement, you said that you think you met Jeff Blades at your offices the next day on the 11th of April 2012. That was at paragraph 71 of your statement. Mr. Blades recalls that it was a meeting on site, and we can see here that you've emailed him the day before about a meeting on site. Do you think, looking at this now, that you may have been mistaken that it was at your offices and that in fact it was at site?
I thought there were two different days, sorry. I remember meeting Jeff. I can't remember meeting him on site. I
Okay.
just don't remember that.
If the meeting was at site, Mr. Blades would have seen, it would have been obvious, wouldn't it, that Grenfell Tower was a building over 18 metres high?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any memory of any discussion with Mr. Blades around the 11th of April 2012 about the performance of cladding in fire? Was that discussed at all at this early stage with him?
Not to my recollection, no.
Now, after the meeting with Mr. Blades, there was a design team meeting number 1 on the 19th of April 2012. For the transcript, the notes of that are at TMO 1001143. And we don't need to turn that up, but following that meeting, you wrote to the TMO. I want to look at that. This is at SEA 404051. Now, this is an email dated the 20th of April 2012 to Mr. Anderson of the TMO. And I want to focus on what's said in the second paragraph about the cladding. There you say, so just to put this in context, you seem to be talking about engagement with the planners that had run on till 2 p.m. That's in the first part of that first paragraph. And then you say this, the comments on the appearance, in the second paragraph you say this, the comments on the appearance of the tower were limited, but both Ed and James were uncomfortable with the suggestion of aluminium cladding. Plastic and Croydon were the words used, and a render system would be their first preference, with a request to consider leaving concrete columns exposed. And then you've got, this is likely to be problematic. They sound very amenable to meeting when we're ready. The pre-application charge is no longer an issue, any on Calc, but they were not sure about Grenfell. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So I just want to ask you about those comments, about how uncomfortable planning were at this stage about the suggestion of aluminium cladding. Did you take it from the meeting you'd had that ACM would be unlikely to get through the planning process?
They don't mention ACM, and I wouldn't have automatically inferred ACM from that comment.
I see. So you're saying that what had been suggested was just aluminium cladding, is that right?
In fact, I would even go so far as to say the emphasis on the materiality is maybe not fully what they were communicating. They were communicating a plastic effect that a flush block can achieve if it's all covered in a panel, a seamless, featureless panel system. And I think that's where they refer to it as plastic. It looks like a plastic box.
I see. So you're...
So I don't think that's possibly, at this point when we're talking in such general terms, I don't think because they did eventually agree to aluminium, I don't think it was the material itself that they were objecting to.
Yeah. It was just the concept of having a metal
Featureless
panel.
Featureless block.
Yeah. So was the planner's concern based on appearance?
Yes.
Yeah. Did anybody at this early stage raise any concern about fire performance?
You wouldn't expect, well, that is obviously handled by building control, not by planning.
Yeah. And we see from the rest of the second paragraph of the email that the planners also suggested a render system as their first preference. Can you just explain to us, so people understand, what is a render system?
It's quite complicated.
Is it effectively kind of sticking material to the existing concrete, kind of plastering material onto it, a substance onto it?
For this application, you would be looking at an insulated render system, of which there are numerous on the market, some of which apply a reinforcement mesh directly to the insulation and then build up a sometimes very thin layer of, we'll call it render, plaster,
Yeah.
on top of it. because it's very thin, it invariably involves a lot of polymers. It's a reinforced polymeric of some sort, and they get more involved with backing boards and cavities.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, they're on a troweled-on surface.
Yeah. Can you just explain briefly why that wasn't pursued? Why was that not really thought about any further?
I think it comes up in conversations later, but any render, even a polymeric type, which you wouldn't expect to repaint, builds up, can pick up a lot of dirt, and invariably can crack at corners, at junctions, and needs to be repaired and cleaned frequently for it not to look very unsightly.
Yeah.
So I think over the lifespan of the planning application, the idea of a render fell away for those reasons.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that at this stage, the selection of materials for the cladding was largely driven by aesthetic considerations, that was uppermost in people's mind?
Yes.
Now, can we look at paragraph 111 of your witness statement? This is at SEA 30144273 at page 52. I just want us to read that together. You say, on the 27th of July, Paul Dunkerton of the TMO emailed me and asked for information for the residents' newsletter regarding the proposals. The same day, Blaine Cagney emailed him attaching images for the newsletter, including one for the VMZ composite, which said it had a polyethylene core FR fire retardancy. I recall that we were still researching cladding options at this stage. I note that in an August 2012 version of the KCTMO project newsletter, the cladding with the most favourable reception from the residents' consultation was a zinc cladding system, illustrated as VMZ composite, with a polyethylene core FR fire retardancy. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now again, on a separate topic, I'm going to come to the question of resident consultation and what the residents were shown in terms of different cladding options. But I just sticking with the theme of ACM, there you refer to Mr. Cagney sending Mr. Dunkerton images of potential cladding panels. Can we just look at that information that was sent by Mr. Cagney? It's at SEA 405330. And this is for the VM Zinc composite panel. And we can see it said there that in the top middle of the page that VMZ composite is a system made up of 2 sheets of zinc and a high-density mineral-rich core, combining the qualities of the zinc with the rigidity and flatness of composite. This combination offers unique architectural possibilities for facades on new or renovated buildings. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And on the right, there's a little diagram, and the label at 2 says polyethylene core FR brackets fire retardancy. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, did you know what polyethylene was at the time?
Not more than that it was a plastic.
Did you know anything about its fire performance?
No.
Did you understand what these references to FR fire retardancy meant at the time in terms of fire performance?
If I had not seen the fire retardancy appended, I would have just said fire rated. I would have just read it as meaning fire rated.
Do you remember noticing at the time that it said FR fire retardancy in relation to this product?
I can't remember the circumstances where I asked Blaine to send this, but I don't think I looked at it.
Okay. And there's the words in the middle which we read as well, saying a high-density mineral-rich core. Does it follow from your answers that you didn't think about that phrase either in terms of what it might mean in terms of fire performance? When you sent this sheet, had you or anyone else at Studio E, as far as you were aware, investigated whether these VM zinc composite panels would comply with the building regulations and the guidance in approved document B for buildings over 18 metres?
No, at this stage we were just researching options.
Yeah. Was there any particular reason why this panel sheet for this VMZ composite was sent to Mr. Dunkerton of the TMO? Can you remember what the rationale was for singling out this product and sending the detail to him?
I know that, well, I don't know, but I can't remember. I haven't tried to piece this bit back together in my mind, but I know that we had a public engagement or resident consultation around this date.
Yeah.
And I believe we presented several options on the boards. I don't think at that stage we had samples. And I think that the request to put something in the newsletter came out of that evening event.
Yeah.
And I think that's where
that came from. Okay. Did you give any consideration at this stage to using a panel with an FR fire retardancy core?
No.
Did you think to check with Exova whether this type of panel would be appropriate for use on the Grenfell project?
No.
Now, we know this was not the main panel that you ended up including in the for the main part of the Nbs specification. We'll come to that in due course when we look at the Proteus honeycomb panel. Can we now go to SEA 405597? And if we can blow that up, we can see from this that it's on the 7th of August, and it's you emailing Mr. Anderson and Mr. Dunkerton of the TMO, copying in a number of others, including some at Max Fordham, about the project. And it appears to be about a meeting that you've had with the planners that morning. You say Mark and I had a positive meeting with Edward George this morning. Now, Edward George was one of the RBKC planners, wasn't he?
Yes.
And you say in the second line, he was comfortable with the zinc, agreeing the joints on the triangle pilasters could be accentuated. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, when you said there he was comfortable with the zinc, what exactly did you mean? Did you mean he was comfortable with the aesthetic look of zinc?
Yes. Yeah. The appearance, that's...
Yeah.
When discussing elevations, that's not the only thing that planners look at, but that's, in this context, what he was looking at.
Yeah, so it was that made him comfortable, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, can we turn on to your statement at paragraph 114? This is SEA 30142773 at page 53. There you're dealing with the email of the 7th of August 2012, which we've just looked at. And I want to focus on the last two sentences in the last 5 lines. You say, in terms of building control compliance, this is 5 lines up from the bottom. In terms of building control compliance, at this stage, I don't believe anyone then would have highlighted this as being of particular relevance to cladding selection. We all believed we were choosing cladding products that had been used many times before. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And I want to ask you about that last phrase. So just to be clear, by August 2012, you've not yourself investigated whether the panels you were considering complied with the building regulations?
No.
And I think we established this earlier in your evidence that you've made an assumption that they must be compliant because they've been used on other projects. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you agree, though, that you didn't know the specific context in which such materials had been used on other projects? You didn't have full details of other projects at this time, so you wouldn't know the full context in which those panels have been used. Now, if we can go on to look at paragraph 136.6 of your statement, that's on page 65. Now, there you go on to talk about a meeting on the 16th of October in 2012 at your offices where CEP introduced Studio E to Debbie French. We just read this paragraph. You say, on the 9th of October 2012, Jeff Blades, CEP, emailed me regarding a meeting to discuss the rain screen materials. I have no record of why he called me, but my recollection is that he thought we may be interested in a zinc composite panel that Rainabond offered. I recall that I met Jeff and Debbie French of Rainabond, and our office calendar records it as having happened on the 16th of October 2012 at Studio E LLP's office. And then you say, while I do not recall much of the detail of the meeting, in these sort of product representative meetings, usually I would have talked them through the drawings, and then they would discuss finishes, sizes, fixings, and details. My recollection is that Jeff and or Debbie brought product samples to the meeting, including, I think, a paint effect, zinc ACM, amongst other metal effects Rainabond offered. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then a little bit further on in that paragraph, you say, I do not recall CEP or Rainabond discussing the plastic core of the panels, nor providing any recommendations for buildings over 18 metres in height. Rainabond's name would continue to come up in the next stage in conversations with the contractors. However, we never approached them directly for advice, nor Alucabond, who I'd been aware of since I was a student. So we have all that.
Did you, I think it was September last year, we came across in our office some of the material that we gathered from...
Yes, and I think you sent that to the inquiry at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
You have seen that?
I believe we've seen that. I'll double check, but I think we have seen that. So you've helpfully explained the meeting here. In your experience, is it common for a supplier, that was CEP, to broker a meeting between a particular manufacturer and an architect? Does that occur frequently on projects?
I'm sorry, I think this was an unusual meeting, yes, I agree, but I wouldn't have thought anything untoward about it.
No, I'm not suggesting there's anything untoward. I'm just asking you how common it was that a supplier like CEP would set up a meeting with a particular manufacturer. Did that strike you as unusual at the time?
Not really unusual. It wasn't. I mean, it was an unusual meeting, yes, because but it also was logical because he knew we were interested in zinc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rainabond had this paint effect zinc.
Yeah. When you say it was an unusual meeting, why do you say that?
Well, I think he approached us rather than we approached him.
I see.
Specifically on this material choice.
Now, you said there that you don't recall the details of that meeting, but you say it's likely that you talked them through the drawings for the project.
Yeah.
Would that have given an indication of how high the tower was at that meeting? Would you have talked about the fact it was a multiple-storey residential block?
I believe I would have.
Now, you've indicated that the discussion at this meeting was around Rainabond's zinc panels. Do you recall, was anything about costs discussed at this meeting?
I can't remember any specific conversations about cost, but
So you can't recall whether anything might have been said at that meeting about zinc being too expensive in the light of the budget? Did you have any such discussions?
I don't know if it was, as I say, I can't remember any specific discussion about cost, but I think it's understood that an aluminium product would be cheaper than a zinc product.
Okay. You understood that at
I
the time, did
understood
you?
that, yeah.
Did you understand at the time of this meeting that there was a difference between zinc composite material panels and pure zinc panels?
Yes.
You knew the difference between a composite panel and
Yes.
yeah. Do you know whether aluminium composite panels were mentioned as an alternative at this meeting?
Well, I believe that zinc patina, which I believe there is a sample of in that folder of samples, was an ACM with a zinc effect painted on.
I see. But do you remember discussing that at the meeting, that aluminium was another option other than zinc composite?
Well, we're looking at various options, yes.
Do you remember any specific discussion about fire safety at this time?
No.
Or about fire performance of particular panels?
No.
Now, I now want to ask you just some questions about value engineering. Just in terms of the overall concept, do you agree that value engineering is the process of trying to find more cost-effective ways of achieving the same outcome or achieving a better outcome for the same cost?
I agree with the first sentence. I think you could have lifted that from my statement. But the second one, yes, I'd agree with that too.
Yeah. In your experience, is value engineering a common process that occurs on construction projects in the UK?
Yes.
Prior to the Grenfell project, had you been involved in value engineering exercises before on other projects?
Yes.
Can we go at this point to SEA, an email that I want to look at, SEA 407413. If we can just blow that up a little bit more. Great. So this is from Alan Dawson of Appleyards, or later Artelia, dated the 26th of February 2013, and it's to you and your colleagues at Studio E, and copying in some others, including at the TMO. And the subject is headed Grenfell Tower Regeneration Project Value Engineering. Do you see that there?
Yep.
And it says, gents, as you are aware, there's currently a significant deficit between the approved cost plan budget and the initial figures coming back from Leadbitter, not least of which on the external facade and general fit out, where we are as much as 483,000 and 1.24 million apart, respectively. And then he says, clearly we have to reconcile, but moreover, bridge this gap as a matter of some urgency. Your urgent assistance in this regard would therefore be appreciated. Can you come back to us with a radical rethink of the scope spec while still meeting the original brief by early part of next week to deliver it within budget? And then he says, if you have any queries as to what's required, please don't hesitate to give any of the team a call. And then he asks for your availability for a meeting. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So this was about 11 months approximately before the Nbs specification was finalised in January 14. And we can see Mr. Dawson is saying that there's a significant deficit between the approved cost plan and the budget, and between the initial figures coming back from Leadbitter at that stage. Now, we know from your statement that the cost plan had been based on zinc. You've told us that. That's at paragraphs 43.5 and 116 to 119 for the transcript. And it would appear from this email that Leadbitter are quoting 483,000 more for the facade than had been anticipated. Is that right? I think we see that.
That's quoted there, yes.
Yeah, not least of which on the external facade and general fit out, where we are as much as 483k and 1.24 million apart, respectively. So I think the external facade is said to be the 483 figure. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you're asked in the second paragraph to undertake a radical rethink of the scope spec. Do you see that there? So this was a significant email to receive, would you agree, in terms of your design of the external wall?
Do I think it's significant?
Because of the word radical, rethink of the scope spec.
I think he's out of line, frankly.
Say that again.
I think he's out of line.
Can you explain why you think he's out of line?
He's not the client.
But he's
If it's a radical rethink, it's not value engineering.
I see. Mr. Dawson, so he's Appleyard's Artelia. They are performing the function of employer's agent,
Project manager.
as well as quantity surveyor and, well, you say project manager, but we know that's
I know it's
not
disputed,
agreed.
but I have seen correspondence supporting it.
They're engaged to carry out the employer's agent, CDM coordinator and quantity surveyor roles. So they're coming back to you. Just on your reaction, was your reaction at the time you're out of order for telling us this?
No, it wasn't. I wasn't that strong a response, but I do think to introduce the words radical rethink is completely at odds with value engineering.
I see. Okay. Now, you've replied to that email on the same day. Can we look at that now? Can we go to that SEA 407414? So we see on the 26th of February, you go back to him and others, and you say, Alan, it is not really possible to undertake a radical rethink without sight of the figures, a discussion with the client, and the involvement with the services engineer, who is not copied into your email. Is the M&E not under review as well? And then you say what you think the obvious targets for savings are. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And you say in that second subparagraph, you've got change zinc cladding material to something cheaper. I think planning will need a sweetener to swallow this, perhaps copper, ceramic, terracotta, or more glass at low level. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And you also say there, just to pick it up now, you say scale back crown. This will also be planning sensitive. Do you see that in the next subparagraph?
Yes.
Did you have aluminium also in mind when you wrote this email, as in aluminium composite material as a potential cheaper option that you might be able to change to?
I was certainly aware of it at that point, yes.
And would that have been based on your meeting and discussions with CEP and Arconic, Deborah French?
Yes. Not exclusively, but yes.
What else would it have been based on? You say not exclusively.
Well, we did a lot of research in the early months of the project, so we met with Rhinobond, but I was very aware of Alucobond.
Yeah. And you were aware that that was going to be a cheaper option than the zinc option?
I think I would have known it would have been cheaper, yes.
Yeah. Now, you say in your email that you had concerns that planning were likely to need a sweetener to swallow this. What did you mean by that?
By taking away the natural finish of a zinc product, they may want to have it compensated somehow. In other words, that's in one way me anticipating a possible conversation or dialogue with planning.
What kind of compensation were you thinking that they might?
Perhaps some high quality materials at low level.
I see, yeah. Now, you then say in your witness statement that you met with CEP to discuss value engineering options on the 4th of March 2013. We can see that if we look at paragraph 190 of your statement. This is SEA 30s 14273 at page 85. So you say on the 4th of March 2013, CEP came into Studio E to discuss the cheaper ACM cladding option and various other value engineering options. Do you see that there?
Yep.
Now, Who first raised the possibility of ACM as a subject to discuss with CEP? Was it you or them? Can you recall?
I'm afraid those two lines, to give it context, all I can say is it was March 2013 and we were in a hiatus. Not really working on the project. The project was the negotiations with Leadbitter hadn't really come to anything yet. I can't remember the context.
Okay. At that meeting, did CEP express a preference for ACM in terms of final product selection?
I'm sorry, I can't remember that.
You can't remember?
At this point, on just those two lines, and I know it's my witness statement, I can't recall the meeting.
No, if you can't recall, you can't recall. I just wanted to know whether you could recall anything more about what was discussed at that meeting. Did you think at this time about getting some independent advice on whether ACM was an appropriate material to use? For example, from Exova?
No.
Were you aware that CEP might have a preference for particular products and might be keen for you to use those particular products?
Well, they didn't disclose any preference.
So you didn't have any concern at the time that by speaking to CEP about it, you might only be being recommended certain products?
When we first approached CEP, we looked at some very diverse products. One of them was a sort of stone chip product. So the fact that they referred us to Rhinobond, to me, wasn't significant. I understood ACM was a fairly generic product.
Okay. You then report back to Artelia that you're considering a number of options. Can we just look at that and then we can break for lunch? So this is a SEA 407442. So this is an email from you, again, to Mr. Dawson. And what I want to do is focus on the fourth bullet in the middle of the page, where you say, we've had CEP come in today to discuss the cheaper ACM cladding option, and they will be forwarding samples for possible presentation to planning. From our conversation with CEP, we feel there might be scope to switch from zinc, but it will require a bit more elaboration than the Leadbetter's figure allows. We note that Leadbetter don't appear to have costed the zinc and have put in a budget figure only. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then in the next bullet, you deal with insulated render, and you say an insulated render is an option for cladding the tower. It's not clear from the schedule whether this is cheaper than ACM. It is less desirable from a maintenance and lifespan point of view. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And I think you explained that. Was that because of the concerns you explained to us earlier?
Yes.
Yeah. And in the next paragraph, you also say that you're looking at a Marley Natura as a cladding option as well.
Yes.
See that? Can you explain what cladding option that was?
Marley is a cement board.
Right. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment.
Yes.
If we could pause there, because then I'm carrying on, but it's a good moment.
Right, thank you. Well, we'll have a break now, Mr. Sounes, so everyone can have some lunch. Please remember not to talk to anyone at all about your evidence or anything to do with it over the break. And we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please. All right? Thank you. Give the usher. Good. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.